And I believe we are live. So, hey, welcome everybody. We are back with Stories at Sundown after a short hiatus. I'm Mac McCullough, reference librarian at Willard Library, and my guest this evening, and geez, Tin Par, is that how you say?
Yes, you did it
You
right.
know, all the years that I've known you, I've never asked you, but thank you so much for coming on. Ta is the executive director of the Burma Center, and has been in that position, what, a little over a year? Or is it longer
Yes,
than that?
formerly over a year.
Yeah. But I got to know Ta a few years ago, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But first of all, Ta, just welcome. And how are you doing? And I know you've been really busy, but let's start with your family. You're a new mom, right?
Yes, I am. It's been amazing. I am so grateful that we wouldn't know how to survive this pandemic if we didn't have our little son. He kept us entertained, and so we're so grateful for that.
Yeah. And your husband, his name?
Yes, his
And
name
your
is
son's name?
Ro. So my husband name is Ro, and then my son name is Boy Zunglian, and then first name sounds like boy, like boy, but it's spelled Bawi.
Okay. Neat. And so everybody's healthy, happy. You're doing well in all of this.
Yes,
Yeah, good.
healthy but teething, so not so good for mom and dad with sleep deprivation. But I'm glad he's getting his teeth. It's a painful journey right now.
Yeah, it's a busy time to be a new parent. We were just talking before going on the air about finding time to read. It's not the easiest thing to do.
Oh yes, and then even childcare or getting work done. I used to say I would never let my child watch TV until they're a certain age. TV is my best babysitter when I have to get things done. So learning a lot right now.
I remember those days, put the high chair right in front of the TV and go get the vacuuming done.
Yes.
So tell me about, tell viewers, you and I have talked about this before, but the Burmese community started coming to Battle Creek in the 80s. But let's start with your family. When did your family come? And just tell me a little bit about your family history.
Yeah. So my dad actually arrived in Guam, I believe maybe like it was past 1988 when there was an uprising in Burma and the country was just in turmoil.
Yeah.
And so he ended up in Guam. And so while he was in Guam, he applied for an asylee status and was granted. And so he moved to the U.S. Ended up in the D.C. area. Living expense was too high. Knew somebody in Battle Creek, and that there were job opportunities with limited English for people with limited English proficiency. So he moved down here. And in 2020, no, not 2020, sorry, in 2000, he petitioned for the rest of the family to join him. And so that's how myself, my mom, and my three sisters and I arrived to Battle Creek, Michigan.
Wow.
And we've been here since then. My older sister now lives in Traverse City with her husband. They have a sushi franchise in Myers. So if you guys are ever there, check them out.
Okay.
Yeah. And then my two sisters are here also in Battle Creek. One is finishing up college. The other one is working at the Burma Center / CACC. And here I am.
Yeah. Wow. So tell me, what was it like growing up in Battle Creek?
So when we came, there weren't a lot of Burmese people. And so it was a very small group. And I believe I went to Urbandale and then I went to Northwestern for middle school. And I believe we were probably like the only Asian in the school. And elementary was the best because I remember like people were like fascinated, like, who are you? Like, where are you from? In a way that was mostly like curiosity, right? Not like, who are you? And so I had a blast because people wanted to be my friend. And I had an amazing teacher, Mr. Jankowski. And he went out of his way, I think, to really help me make friends in the class. And my peers actually taught me, like, would have like flashcard for me to learn words because I was just learning English then. And so it was pretty amazing. But what was really difficult was when in middle school, I felt like I had to pick a side. There was the white kids and there were the black kids, and then I was the Asian, and I felt like, where do I go? And there was some racial tension here and there, so it was kind of messy. And then I moved to Lakeview. I transferred to Lakeview when my parents bought a home, and then by that time, more Burmese people started arriving, so I started hanging out with more Burmese people. But for a long time, I was like, where do I fit? I didn't really know where my place was.
Yeah. And what was that like? And talk a little bit about the experience of, the Burmese community.
Mm-hmm.
It really grew, as you said, after, in the early 2000s and 2010.
Yes. So let me go back to like history really briefly. So in 1962, there was a military coup that happened in Burma, and then there were uprisings that followed since that coup. But what really was a pivotal moment for that country was in '88, when there was a huge demonstration led by college students all over the country that resulted in lots of death and people fleeing the country for safety, because there was a crackdown of people that participated in the movement. And so many people moved to different parts of the world, and like in Malaysia and India and other neighboring countries. And then for many people that resettled in Malaysia, the UN was taking in refugees. And so they were able to get granted the refugee status to resettle here in the U.S. And so we saw a high peak, I would say maybe around like 2008 all the way until like 2012-ish. And that's when we start seeing a high number of Burmese people that started to resettle here in our community.
And why Battle Creek? I'm curious.
Yeah. Well, I think, for starter, like, the Tomu family have been here for forever. For me, it seems like forever, but it's not really forever. But they were pivotal in like helping people find, resources and getting connected to agencies. And then slowly, like, more people knew somebody here and there. And so I think it's just like that connection kind of helped us. And there were churches that, that have experience working with refugees that were willing to take us in. Like we went to First Baptist, and we had a family that, we would eat out dinner together and celebrate holidays together. And it was really cool.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the Burmese community, especially, what do you think people don't know?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Good question. So the Burmese community is extremely diverse.
Yeah.
Ethnically, I think there's major like 8th ethnic group, but there's over like 135 recognized ethnic and tribal groups in Burma. Many of the Burmese people, the majority of the Burmese people in Battle Creek are from the Chin ethnic group from Burma. Mm-hmm. And even within the Chin ethnic group, we have different tribes. And so we have different dialects. And so some, even though they're under the Chin ethnic group, I have no idea what they're talking about. And so for us, it's learning about each other, about ourselves, and then also like the larger, like, Battle Creek community is something that many of us, like at least for my generation, that we're learning, because we were removed from all of that rich culture, like, diversity. And here we're just kind of like, oh, you're Falam or you're Zomi. Okay, like, how do you say this? And so we're really learning each other's culture.
But of course, a lot of people in the community kind of lump you all together, right? I mean,
yes.
Not even just Burmese, Asian, right?
Right. That bigger category. Yes, under the Asian category.
Yeah. That must be frustrating.
For yes, in some cases, yes, because, people don't really understand the complexity of it. And sometimes I think you kind of get used to it, right? Because, in America, when you fill out your census, you only have so many choice. And so then you got used to saying Asian.
Yeah.
I never thought much about how I felt about being identified as Asian. I just kind of like accepted it. Like, here's your label. And I'm like, okay, I'll claim it.
And so, tell the audience what is the Burma Center? What does it do?
Mhm.
And you've been the director a little over a year, as you just said. You're the second director,
Mhm.
and so where is it going?
Yes, thank you for that question. So let me go back. So the Burma Center was founded in 2011 by Martha Tonghung and a few other community leaders. Uh, and the reason was really because when we start to see the high number of Burmese people that were resettled here, there was a lot of need. And then the community and the infrastructure, the agencies just was not ready to serve the community in that capacity. And so, for example, a resettlement agency would provide direct support to the newly arrival people for about like 3 months. But after that, they're kind of on their own. They might help them find jobs, but other than that, they're pretty much on their own to kind of navigate life. And so, if you think about someone who was displaced for a long time, who have resettled here, doesn't speak the language, understand the culture, to navigate like complex systems that even native-born Americans really struggle with, is just it was a perfect how do I like to use idiom by struggle, and I always try that, but it was a bit of chaos, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So Martha felt called to respond to the need, and that's how she founded the Burma Center with the generous support from the Kalak Foundation.
yeah,
And so now 2021, when I came on board, we had to reassess and to say, are we still needed? Because our people have been here for a while. We haven't received any new resettled people in this area, at least within within the Burmese community. And are we still relevant, essentially? And so we did an extensive research, interviewing partner organizations, having community meetings, and asking those questions. And then we've learned that even though we've been here for over 10 years and we don't have issues with like employment or things like that, but the need has changed. And that there's definitely is a need for the Burma Center to continue on and to service the community. Um, and so our mission essentially is to really empower the Burmese community through education, advocacy, and community engagement to support the whole person. And like what that means is that right now we don't have issues with employment, but parents are working ridiculous number of hours,
yeah,
therefore not spending time with their kiddos. And we're starting to see generational gap that was already there, like widen because of lack of time. And also the cultural differences of like how you discipline a child is very different. And so we recognize that we need to do a lot more preventative work at the Burma Center to begin to build our families so that they can be healthy and that they have the support that they need to raise healthy, thriving children. So that's a part of the pillar focus will be family empowerment for us. And then the second thing that we definitely want to focus on is health and wellness. This is really rooted, like if you're sick and you're not well, like forget about everything else, right? Like living day to day is a struggle. And so because we offer medical interpretation and translation services in the area, we kind of had, I guess, an insight as to what are some of the illnesses that our community are experiencing, which is mostly like diabetes, hypertension, and all of that. And so that got us thinking about, okay, so in Burma, because we were underdeveloped country, we didn't have all these junk food or all these things. A lot of things were organic. You just grow a crop and you eat them. But here it's like abundance of healthy and unhealthy, and not necessarily even organic. And so like this is showing up in our body. And so talking about, okay, what does nutrition look like? How could we inform our community about healthy living, just like that, what I mean, to help them, and even the importance of exercising, because we're not farming anymore, we're not walking long distance anymore, we're driving everywhere. Bear Creek doesn't have the layout of like a walking culture, I would say, and so we just drive everywhere. So how do you increase physical activity? But more importantly, even with COVID, right, when under a pandemic, like we were the last people that people would probably think about in terms of, do they know about this virus, or like how it's transmitted from one person to the other. So we had to take that on ourselves to provide timely and relevant and factual information, and working with local health providers. And so those are the things that we've been focusing on in terms of health and wellness. We have 5 pillars. I can go on, but I don't know how in depth you want me to go.
I think well, I mean, what do you want us to know? What are some of the takeaways? We try to keep it to a half an hour. So
yeah, about who we are and what we do. Okay, yeah. So I think that the greatest thing that I want like our viewer to take away is that there is a Burmese community in Battle Creek. We've been here for a while. And we love living in Battle Creek just because of the love and support that we see from Battle Creek community, and that just as much as Battle Creek has welcomed us, we also like to give back in numerous ways. And so I just want to say that.
Excellent. Thank you. One of the things, you and I have talked about this before, and actually I saw you in the video that TRHT just put out last week, which was gorgeous. And you talked about how congregate in your community being together is so important. And we talked in the past about how that's such a challenge during this time of physical distancing and isolation. Is that accurate?
It is accurate. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think for those people that, by those people, I mean for people that are not Burmese and they're listening, the way how our community, before I get to the COVID part, this is something that I really value about our community, because we believe that some burdens, some pain are meant to be carried together as a collective versus individual. And so, for example, when we have someone that passed away, the church will actually organize a nightly service at the family's home until the body is actually buried. And so that's why you'll have, if you have a Burmese neighbor and then one of their family members pass away, you'll see cars for like 5 days, lots of cards in their parking lot, because it's kind of like our collective ritual of healing. And so that was one of the hardest thing, even during COVID, is not to grieve together.
Yeah.
I think if anything, that was the hardest part, because we did lose a few community members to COVID and to other reasons. And that was hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. I was distracted there a minute ago because one of my feeds quit running. So I'm not my own producer. But we're still streaming to YouTube and Willard Library. So we're still good.
Oh, okay.
So, I got to know you when you worked for the Center for Diversity and Innovation. Innovation, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And you've continued that kind of work. I mean, you still involve. You're a practitioner with Truth and Titus. You've done some other things. What drew you to this work and put you on the journey that put you in this position right now?
Yes. So I shared a story, I believe, with other people before. So when I was growing up, the Chin people are an ethnic minority in Burma that's been under persecution from, the Burmese military regime for as long as I've been born in this planet. And so we will always hear stories about, what does freedom look like? What does liberation look like for our people, right? And so at nighttime, my grandfather used to read stories to me at nightly, the book of Esther, like Moses, and like all these amazing biblical figures that led movement and that led that work for social justice for their people, simply put. And so that had always inspired me, and I felt like called to do something, but I never really know what. And so when I came to the U.S., I got into community organizing. Do you remember, were you here when Creating Change was here?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So Creating Change, Jonas, and all. I was in high school, and then we were talking about access to college and how low-income students don't have the same test score as people from affluent background because we didn't have access to test prep or access to those courses.
Yeah.
And that was definitely me. Like, I didn't even know the importance of as like ACT because my parents didn't go here, and I was just like, oh, it's a test. Come to find out, that was critical in terms of admission and as well as scholarship opportunity. So we, through Creating Change, we did some organizing, and that was my first peek into what does activism look like. And I fell in love with organizing. I did that for quite a while, and then I went off to Michigan. And then while I was in Michigan, there is a program called Intergroup Relations where we talk a lot about how identities impact our life experiences, and like how there is like levels when we talk about oppression. And I was like, oh my God, like this makes sense. Like, I had the tool of organizing. Now I have this, like, the framework of why we do what we do. And so combined, like, it just felt like this is my calling to do racial justice, not just racial justice, but equity work in the community as a practitioner. And at the Burma Center, applying these theories and these things that we're teaching to organization, institution in real time. And that has been amazing.
Yeah. Now, this is a good segue to, I want to back up 1 second, though, because we haven't touched on Myanmar and what's happening there. And I know that you organized, or the Burma Center organized, a demonstration at the Sojourner Truth Monument. How has that impacted your community? And yeah, I mean, I think that's enough of a question right there. You could talk a long time right there.
Yes. Oh, even when you ask that question, every time you bring it up, like, emotions start to creep up within me because it's been really hard. Like, many of us are here as a result of the coup that happened in 1962. Like, I think I don't know what people's understanding is, but for me, like, I don't think people ever really want to leave their home country unless they have to, right? Like, and just like right now, at least for us, the people here in America already, like, we don't want to see another wave of people that are displaced. Like, that's the last thing we want to do, and that's the last thing that the people of Burma want to do. What we want to see is the country to be democratic, and for the military regime to release those that they arrested or imprisoned wrongfully, and that for lives to be back to normal as much as possible. And I just assume that everyone knows what's happening. But so there was a coup that happened on February 1st, 2021 in Burma. So like what America felt on January 6th is what we are feeling and have been feeling. And for us, it's just that feeling is continuing to intensify because it's getting violent in Burma.
Yeah. So talk a little bit. We always like to talk on this show about things that people are reading.
Yes.
And you brought up somebody I'm not terribly familiar with, Adrienne Marie Brown.
Yes.
And the book is Help
Emergent
Me.
Strategy.
Emergent Strategy. That's correct. Yes.
Yes.
And so I did a little bit of reading about it, but tell me what it is about Ms. Brown and her work that appeals to you, and how you apply it in your work.
Yes. So I needed something to go back to kind of fuel me during this coup, right? Like, what do we do from afar, and how do we practice self-care and continue to fight? And so I was like, I need to go back to Adrienne. And I haven't picked up this book in like 2 years. And so I can't recite everything from her. But the strategy is really mostly about how critical connection is more important than critical mass. And so we really want to see the world is always changing. Even our notion of right and wrong is always evolving. And so in an ever-changing world, how do we adapt? How do we stay resilient? And how do we imagine a better world is what the book is really diving deep into, and really focusing on how the small reflect the large. And so using nature as an example is that if we all do our small part and it reflects in the larger patterns, that movements and change could really happen. And I just want to read an excerpt from her book, Why I Love Her So Much, because everything that she does, or they does, I don't know how they identify, is really rooted in love and, again, in critical connection. If you don't mind me, can I read like
Please.
2 page? Okay. This is what Adrian said. One thing I have observed, when we are engaged in acts of love, we humans are at our best and most resilient. The love and romance that makes us want to be a better people. The love of children that make us change our whole lives to meet their needs. The love of family that make us drop everything to take care of them. The love of community that makes us work tirelessly with broken hearts. Perhaps humans' core function is love. Love leads us to observe in a much deeper way than any other emotion. I think of how delightful it is to see something new in my lovers' faces, something they may only know from inside as a feeling. If I were the central practice, if love were the central practice of new generation of organizers and spiritual leaders, it would have a massive impact on what we considered organizing. If the goal was to create, if the goal was to increase the love rather than winning or dominating a constant opponent, I think we could actually imagine liberation from constant oppression. We would suddenly be seeing everything we do, everyone we meet, not through the tactical eyes of war, but through the eyes of love. We would see that there's no such thing as a blank canvas, an empty land, or a new idea, but everywhere there is complex, ancient, fertile ground full of potential. We would organize with the perspective that there is wisdom and experience and amazing story in the communities we love, and instead of starting up new ideas, organizations all the time, we want to listen, support, collaborate, merge, and grow through fusion, not competition.
Hmm.
So that's like, there you go. Just like a new paragraph in the introduction.
Yeah. Well, and as I said, I have not read any of her work prior to you telling me today, yesterday that, or a couple of days ago that you wanted to talk about her. But in reading about her work, and I did order the book, and it'll be available at Willard Library within a week or so. But one of the things that struck me was, and tell me if I'm wrong, but there was a real, I think, a critique of an approach of activism and organizing that attacks people for who they are or where they come from, rather than being curious about why they think the way they do. Does that seem like a accurate summary?
About Adrian's approach to
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I think you're talking about like the cancel culture and her critique of that, right?
Yes, that's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But more than that, I mean, more than the cancel culture. That's a terminology that's been around for a couple of years, but really calling people out rather than hearing them.
Calling them in. Yes. The way how, so she talked about this in this book in Resilience too. Because when you call people out, like we're responding to like mistakes and failures in a more of like a punitive lens, right? But her work is more about, again, critical connection. How do we transform? How do we help each other grow? And these like punitive responses often breed the culture of fear, secrecy, and isolation. So like I think it's flipping that mindset.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And as I said, the book will be in Willard Library for anybody who wants to pick it up within the next week or so. I ordered it today. You can also find it on any place you buy books. And it's okay to buy books too, especially if you go back to them all the time.
This is one of the books that you definitely want to buy, because I have like so many pages that like I wrote notes on. So.
Yeah. Well, Todd, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and it's hard for us to stop talking after half an hour, but it's a half-hour show. So, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing where you go with the Burma Center and what's next. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you, Mac.
All right. Thank you, viewers. And I'm sorry for those of you who lost the connection on one of our social media feeds. So we lost some folks, but I'm glad a lot of you stuck with us, and we'll be back next week. Our guest next week is Rob Ridgway at Harper Creek Community Schools. He's a superintendent, so looking forward to talking to him, and we will see you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.